What if the past was very different from what we were taught in history lessons? What if incredible creatures once lived on Earth that test our imagination to the limit? If all the adventurous myths and legends are true, and the evidence is there for everyone to see? There are people who are convinced of an incredible theory. The world has been rebooted several times over the course of time, and knowledge of this shocking truth has been deliberately erased. Created in 1587, Urbano Monti's map is still overshadowed by huge question marks to this day. In a nutshell, the historical puzzle can be summarized as follows. How could the Italian depict something that he couldn't even know existed? Among other things, the map shows us the North Pole and the ice-free Antarctic, even though both areas were not officially discovered and explored until centuries later. We also see a mysterious land bridge that connects Antarctica with South America. But how is this possible? How did Monti manage to depict the world so comprehensively when there were actually still so many blank spots on the maps? The ice-free Antarctic is by no means the only mystery that has crept onto this ancient document. No, fantastic creatures such as centaurs and unicorns also catch our eye. No less strange are the images of sea monsters, hybrid creatures, demons, and dragons. In view of this, one could be forgiven for thinking that we are dealing with the fictional work of a creative fantasy author. And most conservative experts agree that Urbano Monti's map is just that, a depiction that randomly mixes science with adventurous myths and legends. But what if it wasn't true? What if all these incredible creatures were real and people knew exactly about their existence? Fasten your seatbelts because things are about to get particularly freaky. Was the Earth really rebooted? Urbano Monti's map is part of a theory that is very unusual, to say the least. This theory is based on the conviction that the world in the 16th century looked completely different from today's world. To reinforce this hypothesis, its proponents repeatedly consult enigmatic artifacts that simply cannot be placed in a plausible context and are therefore dismissed as nonsense by mainstream historians. However, this is not purely objective expert assessment, but a deliberate manipulation. According to this, the hidden string pullers know exactly what breathtaking things once took place on our planet, but they are doing everything they can to prevent the public from learning the historical truth. But in order to understand this truth, we would first have to abandon a concept that is actually considered sacrosanct. Our understanding of time and history has nothing to do with reality. For example, the highly controversial reboot theory states that before the colonial era, a drastic event took place that literally reset the Earth. The planet was ravaged by something very powerful, either aliens or an advanced high-tech civilization. Australia was literally burned to the ground and turned into an arid desert, and the same is said to have happened in the Sahara and Antarctica. But one nuclear winter later, the South Pole found itself under a massive layer of ice. The fact that there is no trace of the creatures depicted on the map today is again due to the fact that the centaurs, unicorns, and company were wiped out as part of the devastating apocalypse. After the last traces of the Old World had been erased, 2 bloody world wars decimated the landscapes of Europe and Asia. The idea, which has no scientific basis, is that someone or something is restarting the planet over and over again. Accordingly, what is described in the Bible as the Great Flood was actually just the earthly reset button being pressed. However, as the last reset was several centuries ago, some people believe that the next restart is imminent. What do these inexplicable hieroglyphs reveal? The mortuary temple of Sethos is home to one of the most unusual Egyptian engravings ever. While the eponymous pharaoh was in power from 1290 to 1279 BC, he was also the father of the legendary Ramses II. In retrospect, Sethos I is best known for his military campaigns and his breathtaking building projects. However, the excellently preserved mortuary temple of Abydos is adorned with some depictions that simply do not make sense. Here we see structures that look like airplanes, helicopters, submarines, and even spaceships. But how can these mysterious hieroglyphs be explained? Well, that depends on who you ask. Conventional Egyptologists say that we are not dealing with real things here, but with symbolic representations. In fact, the hieroglyphs are not as strange as they first appear. What at first glance looks like a helicopter is actually two different pictographs. In fact, the scientists even managed to translate the original message on the temple wall. He who beats back the 9 enemies of Egypt. At a later date, however, the hieroglyphs were changed and have since read, He who protects Egypt and conquers foreign lands. However, it is not really surprising that the images are interpreted somewhat differently in more alternative circles. They are convinced that the depictions are exactly what they appear to be at first glance, ultra-modern technologies brought to Earth by aliens at the time. Since ancient humans were regularly visited by extraterrestrial intelligences anyway, this is the only logical conclusion. In turn, the mystical beings that had miraculously come to Earth from the heavens were worshipped as divine beings. When Enoch was abducted by aliens. And while we're on the subject of extraterrestrial gods, the Bible is also said to go on and on about UFOs and aliens. Would you like an example? In the first chapter of the book of Ezekiel, it says, A storm wind came from the north, a great cloud of flickering fire, surrounded by a bright glow. From the fire it shone like bright gold. In the middle of it appeared something like 4 living creatures. Each of the living creatures had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and their feet were the feet of the bull. I looked at the living beings. Beside each of the 4, I saw a wheel on the ground. They looked as if they were made of chrysolite. What the theological interpretation calls the apparition of God is interpreted in other series as an uncanny encounter of the third kind. In fact, some people have even set out to use the details described in the Bible to make a sketch of the supposed spaceship. However, the prophet Ezekiel was not the only one to confuse extraterrestrial life forms with the heavenly figures. No, Enoch also experienced something very similar, with the small but significant difference that his story was almost completely banned from the biblical canon. But let's stick with the official version for now. In Genesis 5, we read, The entire lifetime of Enoch was 365 years. Enoch had gone his way with God. Then he was no more, for God had taken him up. But how did this happen? Leaving aside the extraordinary lifespan, why did God decide to take Enoch in? Perhaps a look at the New Testament will shed some light on this. The letter to the Hebrews states, Because of faith, Enoch was caught up and did not have to die. He was no longer found because God had caught him up. Before the rapture, he received the testimony that he pleased God. Well, and that's basically it. Apart from a few other mentions that reveal nothing about the actual story of Enoch, the Holy Scriptures provide us with no further information. However, things are a little different when we close the official Bible and stick our nose into the mysterious Apocrypha instead. In these writings, which the Church rejects, we learn in great detail what Enoch experienced before his rapture and who he may have actually met. First of all, there are the apostate angels. They come to Earth, take the women as their own, and sire gigantic descendants with them, the Nephilim. However, as they cause bloody chaos on Earth, God decides to wipe out the giants with a severe deluge and throw the angels into the lake of fire on Judgment Day. But when the angels learn of their fate, they ask Enoch to plead with God for mercy on their behalf. However, the Creator sticks to his decision, and again it is up to Enoch to deliver the message. During his subsequent journey to heaven, the biblical figure is given a comprehensive insight into the 7 heavens. These include paradise and hell, the choirs of angels, and in the 7th and highest heaven, the throne of God. Once there, Enoch is given the task of writing down everything that the Lord of the worlds dictates to him. In this way, he produces 360 books containing the secrets of heaven and earth and the creation of the world. Back on Earth, Enoch tells his sons what he has experienced and exhorts them to live a God-fearing life. In the end, the divine messenger was taken up to the highest heaven and was never seen again. But why is it that some people associate Enoch's story with extraterrestrials? Well, quite simply, what is described in the books of Enoch as the rapture was actually an alien abduction. That's right, the supposed angels were nothing other than aliens, and the 7 heavens that Enoch saw were the impressions he received during the flight with the spaceship. The uppermost heaven, therefore, embodied the home planet of the extraterrestrial beings, while God was the commander-in-chief of the UFO fleet. Love learning about the most exciting theories about the past? Then what are you waiting for? Press subscribe and never miss a new video again.